Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating mystery. Why did humans, unlike literally any other animal on the planet, wake up on the African savanna roughly 170,000 years ago and, well, decide to put on pants? I mean, it's something so entirely baked into our daily existence that we actually have entire legal systems built around it. But exactly when, and more importantly, why did we start doing this?
It's a surprisingly deep question when you really think about it. I mean, incredibly smart animals, like elephants or dogs, have never once considered needing a jacket, right? Yet humans have built massive social structures around the concept of not being naked. We are quite literally the only species on Earth that will have the state intervene if you're walking around without clothes on.
So, to understand this whole thing, we first have to examine what's called the naked ape paradox. You see, we're essentially the only large mammals on Earth walking around completely hairless. Unlike gorillas, bears, or lions who live across all sorts of wildly different environments, we're just kind of standing there in the middle of all this biodiversity. Smooth, maybe a bit patchy, sporting this evolutionary look that basically says, yeah, we made some choices.
And the sheer scale of those evolutionary choices, it is staggering. We actually lost our fur to avoid overheating while hunting on open grasslands. You know, if you're running down prey all day, a thick fur coat is just a massive liability. So what did we do? We replaced it with 2 to 4 million sweat glands. That's right, millions of them. It turned us into these elite professional-grade sweating machines. But here's the catch. While that's absolutely fantastic for running in the heat, it is considerably less great when you're suddenly facing freezing temperatures.
Now let's tackle a very common misconception here. The tidy, conventional narrative you've probably heard says that humans moved out of Africa, hit some colder climates, got chilly, and naturally just wrapped themselves in animal skins. Makes sense, right? It's clean, it's logical, honestly, a 5-year-old could figure it out. But actually, scratch that, because the archaeological timeline completely shatters this entire theory.
Seriously, the timeline just does not add up. The evidence for clothing appears tens of thousands of years before modern humans ever even migrated out of Africa into that cold weather. We're looking at evidence of clothing starting somewhere between 170,000 and 100,000 years ago. But that big migration out of Africa, that didn't happen until around 70,000 years ago. So what does this tell us? It proves for sure that just staying warm absolutely was not the original trigger for getting dressed.
Moving on to Section 2, the bizarre lice clue, the parasite that mapped human fashion.
So this brings us to a total mind-bending evolutionary plot twist. The most unlikely forensic evidence in this entire origin story comes from researchers at the University of Florida who are studying lice. Yep. And yes, it is exactly as gross as it sounds, but stick with me because it's genuinely fascinating. You have to understand this absolutely crucial biological distinction. Basically, humans have two main types of lice. Head lice, well, they survive exclusively in human hair. But body lice? They cannot survive on bare skin. No way. They absolutely require the ecological niche, the shelter, and the warmth of fabric to exist. They literally live specifically in the seams and folds of our clothing.
So, by mapping out their genetics, scientists discovered something wild. Body lice actually diverged from head lice somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Think about that. This tiny, annoying little parasite accidentally preserved the exact timeline of when humans consistently started wearing clothes. The lice literally adapted to our clothing way before we ever even left Africa. It's a real game changer for how we look at this history.
That brings us to Section 3, the real first reasons. If not for the cold, then why?
Okay, let's dive into what those early clothes were actually used for, especially now that we've firmly established it wasn't just about surviving freezing temperatures. The first real drivers? Well, they were probably just basic, kind of boring physical protection. Think about it. A simple hide wrap creates a really meaningful barrier against a pretty abrasive savanna environment. We're talking thorns, annoying insects, the blistering sun, all of it. But that was rapidly followed by something much deeper, profound social signaling. You know humans, we are obsessed with hierarchy. Deciding who gets to wear the cool leopard skin basically kicked off the very first fashion industry.
And this social need, it runs incredibly deep. We actually have solid evidence from 200,000 years ago showing our ancestors painting themselves with ochre. So what does this mean? It proves that the human impulse to visually broadcast our identity and our status totally predates the physical act of getting dressed. We were literally painting ourselves before we were even dressing ourselves.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is that this impulse wasn't even exclusive to us, to Homo sapiens. Nope! Neanderthals were out there systematically processing hides with specific stone tools, and Denisovans were crafting these polished ornaments. It raises a genuinely sort of unsettling question. Is clothing just an inevitable bipedal primate invention? Like, if you're smart enough and social enough, is wrapping yourself in something just the completely obvious next step?
Moving right along to Section 4, the bone needle revolution, from draped hides to engineered survival.
So for most of early human history, clothing was basically just crude hides thrown over your shoulders, kind of like wearing a prehistoric bin bag, you know? I mean, it got the job done, but it was incredibly ungraceful. But then, right around 50,000 years ago, everything completely changed. Deep inside the Siberian Denisova cave, archaeologists stumbled upon this 50,000-year-old hollow bird bone that had been carefully crafted into a needle, complete with a tiny, precise eye. This is huge. It represents an unbelievable cognitive leap toward actual tailored, fitted clothing. Some genius ancestor used imagination and craft to intentionally stitch materials together. It is literally the birth of actual tailoring.
And let me tell you, that tailored clothing quickly became the literal thin line between life and death, because between 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, these brutal glacial cycles plunged global temperatures and it crashed the human population down to a mere 10,000 to 30,000 individuals worldwide. We almost went entirely extinct. The groups that managed to survive that nightmare, they were the ones with fitted, sealed, and layered clothing that could successfully trap heat right against the body.
And that leads us to Section 5, from survival to wardrobes, the textile revolution and human expression.
Once we finally survived the ice, our whole relationship with clothing evolved all over again. We started transitioning away from those heavy, stiff animal hides that required constant, exhausting hunting, and we moved toward an entirely new era of human ingenuity. Check this out. The oldest twisted plant fiber, which was found in the Republic of Georgia and dates back 30,000 years, was already intentionally dyed multiple colors. How amazing is that? This wasn't just pure function anymore. It was art. And that really paved the way for the Neolithic agricultural revolution around 10,000 BCE to introduce things like flax, wool, cotton, and eventually the true specialized modern wardrobe.
All of this really just reveals the fundamental weirdness of human clothing. Think about it. If it were purely about thermal efficiency, every single culture would have just standardized the warmest possible shape and stopped right there. Job done. But no. Unlike any other animal, humans universally weaponize clothing, turning it into this complex shared language. We use it constantly to broadcast our personal and cultural narratives. We're signaling our rank, our group identity, whether we're in mourning, or hey, even if we're dangerous.
Which finally brings us right back to you. When you get dressed, you are doing exactly what that person on the African savanna was doing 150,000 years ago. Every single day, you're making these conscious and sometimes unconscious choices about what to put on your body. So take a quick look at what you threw on this morning and ask yourself, what exactly are you signaling to the people around your fire today?